Hello, this is Dr. Day Maslock talking to you about reciprocity.com. The E is written with a 3. And in this particular video, I want to talk to you about 7 different ways that you know or to figure out whether a doctorate is for you. So if you don't know me, I'm a professor of innovation strategy and entrepreneurship, and I created this whole reciprocity project to give back as much as I possibly can. There were so many people that helped me out to get through graduate school that I wanted to pay the favor forward and help you out as much as I possibly can. All right. So, the question of trying to figure out whether a doctorate, a PhD, whatever it is for you, some sort of terminal degree is for you, is a little bit complicated because you've never done this before. If you're like me, I grew up in a small, tiny town in Northern Ontario. You probably just don't know a lot of people that have done this. And you go talk to your professors and, they might tell you the truth and be straightforward with you. But a lot of them are probably not going to have a lot of time for you because they don't know how serious you are. The other thing is they may not tell you the truth because they're trying to sell you on something. And I just want to be open as much as I possibly can. I truly believe in full information. And I'm not trying to sort of hold anything back with this. So I just want you to make it the best possible decision that you possibly can in terms of doing a doctorate and going forward with that. So, all right. So what I would do in terms of, making this decision is I would try to think about how to match your future behaviors to currently how you behave and what sort of gives you sort of satisfaction or gratification right now, and sort of match those behaviors and what you want to do in the future. And if you could sort of match those as best as you possibly can, then you're probably going to be really happy with what you're doing, right? So you want to think about what kind of makes you happy right now, in the way that sort of makes you happy is not necessarily, like happiness, but, what you sort of enjoy, or that once you've done that thing that you've thought about and you said, yeah, I enjoy it. There's lots of things that in the moment, it's not necessarily all that enjoyable. So one good indication for that is, does time pass very, very quickly when you're doing that particular activity? And if it does, then that's probably a good signal that you're in a state of flow, right? So you're feeling really good, then you're just being engaged. Your mind is sort of actively engaged, and that's kind of what you're looking for, right? So that those moments that you feel great, and you want to match those behaviors with where you're going to be in the future, and sort of match those as possible, and have those as closely aligned as possible. Because if you do that thing, and if you're sort of pursuing something just for financial concerns, first of all, a lot of PhDs in many different areas are not all that lucrative. Some will provide a pretty good income. Most of them, if you get a sort of professor job and you have a PhD, you're going to be living decently well, right? You're basically living like everybody else, but it's not sort of financially rewarding in the way that you're sort of thinking about, right? So maybe a PhD in finance might be financially rewarding, but there's easier routes of doing it, right? So you want to sort of think about what is going to give you joy, or you're going to be sort of satisfied with what you're currently doing, rather than the sort of financial stuff. The financial stuff sort of flows from that. And if you could sort of figure out what gives you joy and that you are engaged, the financial stuff, you could sort of figure out how to make it sort of financially engaging, right? Or financially rewarding. And that's the one thing to think about, right? So, what are these 7 different ways to think about whether you actually might like to do a doctorate? And so I've sort of listed these things out and sort of thought about them before. And here are the things that I think if they really engage with you and currently the way that you behave, if that engages with you and you find it rewarding, then you're likely to find a PhD or a doctorate rewarding. So the first thing is if you like to write and analyze data. So writing is a huge component out of any PhD that you do. It's a really difficult sort of task for me, but it is a major part of what you do. And the more that you do, or the more that you become successful, the more that you actually have to write. Or maybe you build a team of people that are doing writing on behalf of you, right? So that is when you're a full professor and you have lots of people actually writing for you, doctorate students and stuff like that. But that doesn't happen right away. You have to actually do a lot of writing yourself. Mm-mm. All right. So if you are, if you like to analyze data, and I would put myself in that sort of component. I like to actually look at data or come up with different models and things like that. Then it makes sense. And the reason why I know that is because time just goes really quickly when I'm doing it, and it just disappears. It truly disappears for me. And so if you have that kind of experience, then it kind of makes sense for you to sort of pursue that. If you are competitive, right? So if you are competitive by nature, you really like the aspect of competing with other people, the academic world, the PhD world, the doctorate world is extremely competitive. If you didn't know that, it is, and it's probably one of the biggest myths that everybody sort of thinks about, is that you're going to become a professor and it's going to be really easy and all that kind of stuff. It's not true. Absolutely not true. It is probably the most competitive environment that you can go into, maybe other than like trading or some financial trading, right? In Wall Street. It's very, very competitive. And the reason is that there's lots of really smart people in this world. And you have to compete against these smart people. And then you also have to convince these smart people that your ideas are actually really sound. And that's what you're trying to do, right? It's not necessarily that you're sitting back and whatnot. You're actually working pretty hard. And so if you like that, in particularly if you go into different fields, some are more competitive than others, I would say, but some fields are extremely competitive. And, if you want to do well and excel at that particular field, then you have to be competitive, right? And people will work crazy hours nonstop for years and years and years. And that's how they sort of succeed at that particular, those particular domains. And that's pretty normal, actually, when in any PhD field, if you didn't know that, but you just have to work a lot. And if you like that sort of competitive nature, then it makes sense for you. And, I've got lots of different videos in terms of why, the sort of things that happen, behavioral things that happen that you will sort of experience when you're doing that. You can watch those other videos because of the sort of competitive nature. A third thing that I think is really important is if you are a person that's just kind of naturally curious and you're just kind of wondering how the world works, then it actually makes sense for you, right, to do a doctorate. I was always that sort of person that was very curious about how the world works. And it's part of the reason why I got into doing this whole YouTubing thing. I was curious on how it worked and, how does it truly work to actually build something like this. And so, I'm just curious, and that's how you have to be. And every so often I do engage with people that don't have a doctorate that are just really curious about how the world works. And it's really fun to engage with them. But people that do excel and they, are at the top of their game during a PhD, they're extremely curious about how the world works. And they're constantly sort of questioning how things actually work. It's just sort of part of their nature, right? And that kind of is a fun thing, and that's why we all get into this, right? So it's kind of being a scholar. It's just being curious about how the world works. And that's kind of the sort of historical background behind it. So we're all naturally curious, right? All going all the way back to like Aristotle and Plato and all that kind of stuff. We're just kind of nerdy. The other thing is so this is something, so a fourth thing is if you really struggle with people telling you that you're doing the wrong thing, and we all struggle with that, right? So we are all always getting beat up. And the more that you struggle with that, the more that it sort of gets to you, it probably doesn't make sense to actually do a doctorate. Everything that we do is about trial and error, and everything that we do is about somebody telling you that you're doing the wrong thing. And that's really the learning process, right? So if you are in graduate school right now, if you're doing an undergrad right now, and you're just getting tired of people telling you that you're doing the wrong thing, That's kind of the nature of the beast. It doesn't change that much as you continue to go through, right? From high school to undergraduate to PhD to professor, we're constantly getting told that we're doing the wrong thing all the time from everybody around us. And so if you are a person that has a hard time dealing with that, and I personally, I'm one of those people. I'm going to sort of tell you that. I've had to learn to be a little bit better with it. I'm not, but I'm learning as I go. Maybe when I'm 75, it's going to change and I'll be really good with it. But it still is a struggle for me, and it still beats me up. And so that's something that you have to deal with, and just to let you know that that is a real important thing. If you are, so a fifth thing is if you're okay with being by yourself and studying by yourself, then a doctorate is actually a really good sort of career choice, right? It is pretty, even though we work with a lot of people, I have co-authors and stuff like that, it is still a solo endeavor. You do work by yourself a lot, and it's kind of the nature of the business. So what ends up happening, the sort of normal pattern, is you go and you might meet for a little bit, and then you got to go work by yourself for a couple of days, maybe even a week, maybe 2 weeks, and then you go back and you meet again. And that's kind of normal. It's a lot less than the business environment where you're always interacting, or maybe a sales job where you're always interacting with people. This is limited interacting, right? And that's kind of the nature of the beast. And we all have to deal with that. And even when you're interacting, maybe it's in a classroom and you're a professor, for example, and you're lecturing, it's not the same sort of thing in back and forth that you're getting in terms of, being on a team, for example. It's a lot different in terms of dealing with that. A sixth thing I think that is really fun, and this is what I like, is that if you can deal with sort of abstract terms, and the more that you can abstract around the world around us. And I noticed that when I was in my undergrad and in high school, I was like thinking about things a lot more abstractly than other people. If you can do that, and that's kind of your nature, then it kind of makes sense to actually continue on with what you're doing. And what do I mean by abstract nature is that, a lot of people will sort of see things at face value, and they'll just see things the way they are. But if you can take a step back and sort of analyze what's going on and think about things really abstractly, and maybe come up with your own ideas and things like that, then it makes a lot of sense, right? If you're that kind of person, then we all think like that. And the more that you can do that, the sort of bigger, grander ideas that you can get. And the seventh thing, okay, this is really funny, and my siblings tease me about this on a regular basis, is that if you want to play the part, and if you are really wanting to play the part, then you probably should do a doctorate, right? So what do I mean by that? Well, when I was like 19 years old, I always kind of thought I was kind of a little bit more intellectual than other people, kind of nerdy. And I smoked a pipe for a little bit. Total nerdy thing. They'd make fun of me. I don't smoke anymore. Don't ever do that. But, it's kind of a weird thing that I got into that. I don't know what I was thinking. I think I was trying to act the part. Now that I'm doing the part, I try not to act the part as much as I possibly can. But if you're that kind of person that you're like, I'm sort of intellectual or sort of curious, nerdy, and you want to act that sort of component of it, then it makes total sense for you to continue on with what you're doing. And that sort of gives you a signal that you're doing probably the right thing. And the last thing that I'd want to sort of raise is that if you don't want to go into industry, doing a PhD is probably, if you want to go into industry, doing a PhD is probably not the sort of best route for you unless you're in sort of the sciences or hard sciences and stuff like that, where you're doing like a PhD in chemistry, and it's a lot more common. It's just not as common, and there's much easier ways of doing, going into industry and sort of getting a comparable degree, and sort of starting off at the same spot. I mean, that's what I mean in terms of when you get out and working your way up, and that are much more sort of financially rewarding. I'm going to be honest with you, it is probably the most difficult way of getting into sort of senior level positions. The best way to actually do that is, go get some sort of undergraduate science degree or mathematics or something like that, and then go do an MBA. And then you'll get into the senior level positions in a company. If that's what you're thinking about, or in industry, maybe government, for example, that's going to be the quickest way, and it's going to be the probably the most financially rewarding way. It's not going to cost you as much money and effort and all that kind of stuff. So that's what I would suggest, and that's what I would probably do going back and sort of thinking about it again if I wanted to go that route. All right, so that's all I really wanted to talk about with, whether it actually makes sense for you to do a PhD, and sort of ways that you actually know that a doctorate is for you. So the big thing I wanted to point out with all these sort of components and stuff is that if you are just interested in how the world works and you want to spend the rest of your life essentially sort of investigating questions about the world, then that's really why you do a PhD or why you do a doctorate and why you sort of get into the academic life, is simply because you are just curious. And the more curious you are, the more that you should probably actually do that kind of career. There's a lot of sort of downsides. You can watch some of my other videos in terms of it, but in general, that's why we all do it. We're all kind of nerdy and curious about nerdy not being a bad thing, but we're just curious about how the world works. All right, so if that answers your question, this was actually, I asked a bunch of people. I did a survey and asked a bunch of people on the YouTube channel what video they wanted to watch, and this is the one that popped up. So hopefully you liked it, and do give me a thumbs up and do subscribe to the YouTube channel. All right, take care. Bye.